Hello, friends and colleagues, and welcome to the Tourism Skillshop, hosted by State of Washington Tourism, SWT. My name is Matthew Ozuna, and I am the Destination Development Manager at SWT. I will introduce today's webinar on tourism partnerships and stakeholder engagement along Scenic Byways. Please utilize the chat and say hello. Let us know where you're zooming in from today, if it's in Washington State or somewhere else around the world. Feel free to share your comments in the chat box and use the Q&A feature as well. Mike Moe will be joining us today. He is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Destination Development at SWT. Mike will monitor the chat and help address questions from the audience near the end of the webinar. But if your question is timely and relevant, we might take it in the moment. So go ahead and utilize the chat and the Q&A, and Mike will bring those questions to our attention. Let me give you some background on the Tourism Skillshop from State of Washington Tourism. The Tourism Skillshop is one of many industry educational programs from State of Washington Tourism. This webinar series will engage with colleagues across the tourism sector and broaden their industry knowledge, skills, and network. Each webinar will highlight a specific issue or skill for tourism professionals to ponder and discuss industry experts. State of Washington Tourism will host live webinars of the Tourism Skillshop on the third or fourth Thursday of every month from 10 to 11 a.m. These webinars are free and open to all tourism stakeholders. The webinars will also be recorded and shared with registrants as well as other users on the SWT YouTube channel. For Tourism Skillshop and other industry updates, visit the SWT industry website, sign up for the industry update newsletter, and follow SWT on LinkedIn. Tourism stakeholders may also join the SWT Facebook group for further discussions on topics related to the Tourism Skillshop and other industry news, issues, and events. Now let's dive into today's webinar. This webinar in the Tourism Skillshop will examine tourism partnerships and stakeholder engagement along Scenic Byways. Scenic Byways offer a range of social, economic, and environmental benefits for destination communities. However, many of these benefits depend on corridor management plans, tourism partnerships, and stakeholder engagement. How do byway organizations, destination organizations, and other tourism stakeholders maintain communication, leverage resources, and work toward common goals? By soliciting feedback, building relationships, and engaging in long-term planning, these entities support the promotion and management of scenic byways as well as rural tourism throughout regional destinations. This webinar will feature industry experts with knowledge of scenic byways, destination promotion, and destination development for rural communities. They are tourism consultant and professor, Dr. Maree Forbes Gaughan, as well as the executive directors of two scenic byways within the state of Washington. Roni Freund leads the Cascade Loop, and Stephanie Sims oversees operations at the International Selkirk Loop. I'll give you a little bit more information on our panelists today. I don't normally do this, but I think it's important. I think we're going to have a lot of fun, and so I want you to get to know the panelists a little more, folks. Dr. Forbes is the managing partner at the National Travel Center, NTC, a nonprofit travel and tourism consulting firm. She has more than 35 years of experience working on rural tourism and scenic byway projects. Dr. Forbes also serves as a destination management and marketing professor at Temple University and is the author of several books and multiple articles, white papers, research summaries, and other publications. Roni Freund is the executive director of the Cascade Loop, a 440-mile national scenic byway, which became one of the world's first electric scenic byways in 2014. The loop circles through the North Cascade mountain range, along the semi-arid Columbia River Valley, past glacier-fed Lake Chelan, and through the North Cascades National Park, and then finally into Puget Sound. The tourism offerings along this byway are as diverse as its landscapes, from sea kayaking, wine tasting, and paragliding to one of the best Oktoberfest celebrations outside of Germany, and I can attest to that. Stephanie Sims is the executive director of the International Selkirk Loop, a 450-kilometer, 280-mile all-American road, and North America's only multinational scenic drive. This scenic byway encircles the spectacular Selkirk Mountains of Washington, Idaho, and British Columbia. Travelers along the byway can recreate on crystal clear rivers and lakes, or among the evergreen forests and snow-capped peaks. They are sure to come across abundant wildlife, friendly locals, as well as rural communities with fascinating histories and things to do. Ladies, thank you for joining us today. I'm looking forward to an exciting discussion on scenic byways and tourism and economic development, destination development, all of those things. Before we start, actually, we'll start with Dr. Forbes. Maree, you can start us off and give us a little bit more background information on scenic byways. What are they, how they're managed, how they're marketed, things like that. And then we'll turn it over to Stephanie and Roni a little later in the webinar. So Stephanie and Roni, go ahead and turn off your cameras, mute yourselves, and Maree, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect, Matt. Thank you. I'm going to be introducing scenic byways. You'll get a better idea of what they are and what they can do for you as tourism destinations. And while Matt organizes the full screen here, scenic byways are America's beautiful economic generators. And they're fantastic tourism offerings that can deliver a lot of economic impact to the communities they pass through. So we're going to first look at what is the scenic byway. They're specifically designed and designated routes for their scenic byway, their scenic beauty and other qualities. Many people don't know that the first scenic byway was created in California way back in 1963, the Big Sur Coast Highway. The program started at the Federal Highway Administration about 30 years ago. And another thing that a lot of people don't understand, there are more than 1,100 state and federal byways across the United States. There are a lot of these beautiful roads. And the only way that they create economic development, and this is really important for tourism people, is by attracting visitors. They travel the routes, they dine, they shop, they stay, they explore. They love the history and culture along the route, and they enjoy themselves and leave their money behind for the destinations.
Maree, I should also mention, state of Washington started its byway program in, I believe, 1968, and we're up to 60 some byways on paper anyway.
Yes, yeah, 65. And we went through those. We were really surprised as to the number of byways in Washington state. You are behind, as far as we know, only California, which has about 10 more than you do. But there are other states that have very lengthy lists, but nothing close.
Well, and there's a few people within Washington state that are surprised to know there are actually byways in their neck of the woods that have, maybe the way to kind of phrase it is gone into hibernation. These byways and byway organizations have or need to be revitalized to reach their tourism potential.
And that's one of the things that we're doing all across the country, is basically helping byways regenerate and reach financial sustainability into the future, so that in fact the roads can be protected and the visitors can continue to enjoy their experiences. So byways all have intrinsic qualities, and that's a term that you use only in the byway community. I have never heard a tourism person use it, and we always end up trying to define it for municipal officials and such who have no idea what we're talking about. Basically, they're the qualities along the route that make it distinctive and attract visitors. You've got scenic, and many of the byways are scenic. If you're a state byway or a national byway, you only have to have one intrinsic quality. All American roads have to have more than one, but many of the byways are scenic byways with great views and absolutely striking landscapes. A number of them, and they're called historic byways, are basically a representation of the history along the route and include a lot of museums and historic sites and such that really tell the story. Cultural byways, and I think you have some in Washington State, that really display the traditions and the customs that came with the people who settled along the route. Natural features are more observational. They're features that people basically look at and enjoy. Recreational, hiking, biking, motorcycle riding, every other thing you can think about recreational, outdoor recreation occurs along byways. And then archaeological, there are some like the Native American mounds along the Mississippi River that in fact are based on some very special archaeological evidence of prehistoric life.
Yeah, I'm thinking of whether it's in Arizona or New Mexico, the cliff dwelling peoples and their structures. I think maybe in a few national parks, or there's a state park.
Mesa Verde National Park, and there is in fact a road that connects Hovenweep and a number of other of those locations that are absolutely phenomenal. They've been there for millenniums and are still amazing in the preservation and how they were built initially. The cliff dwellings in Mesa Verde have hundreds of rooms and were occupied by one incredibly cohesive society. Okay, on to the next question. Why are scenic byways important? Because as we all learned during COVID, they provide the kind of experience that visitors want to enjoy. They give visitors the opportunity to proceed at their own pace, enjoy the scenic beauty, disconnect from their telephone or any other electronics, and basically immerse themselves in a beautiful natural environment. And with today's stressed out visitors, that's exactly what they're looking to do when they get away. They also deliver visitor spending to the areas they pass through. One of the things that we sent Mike was I apologize, sent Matt, was a paper about the economic benefits of scenic byways. On average, scenic byways generate between $250,000 and $450,000 per mile, per byway, per year in visitor spending. And we vetted that with the Colorado byways after we looked at an average of a number of different byways. We vetted that with Colorado's byways, and they came in at $313,000. So they are a phenomenal visitor spending generator. Preserve the qualities along the roads and contribute to protecting the environment. There's a number of byways right now that are involved in struggles with development and view sheds and other incidences. One good example is a good portion of the Big Sur actually fell into the sea during the storms they had at the edge of California. So protecting the environment is really important. And many of them are involved in a struggle to do that. They connect rural communities. They're like a thread of a story that runs between small towns and rural communities and small cities in some cases that take the thread of the history or the scenery or the culture along the route. And they become a point of pride in rural communities. Many of them actually promote the fact that they have this scenic byway within their midst. And approximately 69 million travelers are particularly interested in scenic byways. We have another white paper called Today's Prime Road Trippers, and they spend a lot of money along the routes enjoying themselves.
Now, folks on the webinar today, the facts and figures that Maree just mentioned, I'll share all of those with you in a few documents that she provided me. You'll get that with the recording later this week. And we'll go to the next slide.
Next slide. How are scenic byways managed? In a whole variety of ways. They used to all have a supporting byway organization, because that was one of the original requirements, that every byway had to be supported by an organization that was resident in the community where it was resident. And many of them were independent 501c3s, council of government organizations, and on and on and on. A lot of that's changed. There are some byways that have been adopted by their national heritage areas. There are many, many byways that are resident and DMOs, some in chambers of commerce, some in economic development organizations, and there are a number of locations now around the country that they've combined DMO, Chamber of Commerce, Economic Development, into one organization, and that combined organization then supports the byway. There are also counties that do it independently. They're all governed by a corridor management plan, and that, along with the supporting organization, was the original requirement. We think some of them are way too lengthy, had way too many goals, way too many objectives. They weren't ever going to be achieved. And as we go through and help update and rewrite these things, try to be way, 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 way more strategic about what can you actually accomplish, and what do you need to accomplish also to fulfill the protecting the environment and the other qualities. Many have strong partnerships with their DMOs. They're managed by a DMO, or in Roni's case, they're their own DMO. We're using her model of having a 501c3 and a 501c6 in California, and to help the Volcanic Legacy also become its own DMO, because it is about equal length, maybe a few more miles. And they involve the locations along the road as partners. The museums, the accommodations, the restaurants, retail activities. Those are the things that byway visitors explore as they drive the routes, and they're all very much incorporated in partnerships. And that's one of the really important things, so that as the traveler makes their way along the route, the various locations they visit can be amplifying and enhancing the byway story as they go along. It's really important to train these locations about the byway story and about what they, if they're an attraction or more, contribute to that story, so that they can start to weave the whole picture together for the byway traveler. Several are focusing on achieving financial sustainability. One of the things that's happening in the United States is that many of the original byway leaders are now retired or beyond, and trying to figure out how do they generate revenue streams that will enable them to hire someone, because most of them do not have an executive director at this point. And there are several different ways they can do that to get a portfolio of revenue streams that don't have them dependent on hotel tax, don't have them dependent on one revenue stream, but have a collection of those, so that they can achieve financial sustainability for the next couple of decades.
Maree, you mentioned a few great points in this one slide. I think this one slide could be its own webinar. Corridor management plans, CMPs. Folks on the call might know this, but just a friendly reminder and guidance from the National Scenic Byway Foundation. I think they recommend updating CMPs every 5 years. Is that correct, Maree? Is that what you recommend as well?
Well, yes, it is. But most of what we're dealing with are at least 20 years old.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the problem. So the major updates. major updates, but it doesn't mean lengthy updates or lengthy CMPs, as you just mentioned. So that's kind of the art and the science of this, and the practicality of practical CMP that gets things done and then is updated again in 5 years, which is pretty short time period, don't you think?
Well, things are happening pretty quickly,
Sure.
and things are changing so fast these days. But what we try to do is, you can't change what happened in the past, or you can't change what has happened in the present, and you don't generally change the byway, because adding route miles can be really complicated. So we try to put those into an archival type of document that describes all of that, but then focus on the future. And
Excellent.
we're doing some what we call a listen to learn, in reaching out to the community and municipalities and businesses along the routes and such, and talking about what do you see as the future of the byway. And then you're reincorporating that whole community support into the planning effort.
No,
And
I agree.
they often come up with some really good ideas.
Well, that's a great way to keep your stakeholders engaged every 5 years, or leading up within those 5 years. And even though there's multiple changes within a short or medium period of time, your partnerships are long-term commitments, and we'll hear more about that from Stephanie and Roni a little later. But we'll move on to your next slide.
Absolutely. And how are scenic byways promoted? Oh, and again, in a number of a lot of different ways. Only about 25% have their own websites, which is kind of amazing as a tourism product. So many are involved in events, locations along the routes. And unless they have their own capacity to promote, their DMO is the most effective way and effective means of promotion. When federal funding was discontinued back in 2012, and we've only had one more round of it since then, and they only gave out money for infrastructure projects, which isn't where it was needed. There hasn't been any marketing money except for those byways that have been thriving with membership and that kind of thing. So their DMO is by far the most effective means to help promote them. There are qualities that need to be included in a specifically designed byway website if they are intended to attract visitors. Not only do DMOs not know what intrinsic qualities are, travelers have no idea what they are. So you really have to remove all the byway speak. And the other strange thing that happened when byway websites started to get put together is, instead of focusing on the road and the visitor experience and economic development, they put all their organizational material, like minutes and board meetings and officers and all of that kind of thing. And our recommendation is, please move that either to a blog that attaches to your byway website, or somehow make it a separate website, so that when you focus on the visitors, they're not really interested in that sort of thing. Oftentimes there's a portion of a DMO website devoted to a scenic byway or byways. And social media is an incredibly effective way to promote them. We did a test program last summer with a very short byway in upstate New York, where we had them out on 8 platforms 3 times a week for 6 months. We page tagged with the DMOs, I Love New York, the attractions we were promoting, and piggybacked on the various events that were occurring along the route. And they ended up in 157,161 Google searches during the 6 months. Way beyond what any of us ever anticipated. Needless to say, we're doing another program this summer. And the other thing that we're doing at NTC is we have a website that is devoted to scenic byway detailed itineraries. And one of our people is going to the National Tour Association Travel Exchange in the fall to be debuting all the itineraries that we have done. And then from my old tour operator days, we're taking them overseas to the tour operators overseas that book individual travelers onto America's highways, and there are many of those. So there are a lot of different ways that you can promote byways. And so why is it all important? They're robust travel offerings, and for DMOs, they're travel offerings that are already all put together. You don't have to design them. You don't have to figure out what the story is. You don't have to get everybody to cooperate because they're already done. And as a result, they deliver the most efficient form of economic development to rural areas. And that is usually where economic development is the hardest to come by. But every one of those small communities has a story to tell. They all have heritage, and they all can contribute to the story along the byway. And once the qualities of those routes are destroyed, they're gone. You can't remanufacture a byway. And unfortunately, those that are in struggles for preservation of the landscape, etc., we need to do everything we can to make sure that nothing happens to them. Travelers lose one of the most appealing leisure travel experiences. America loses a large portion of its scenic beauty, and the tourism offices lose one of the most easily promoted offerings. They are really something that visitors want to do. Visitors don't necessarily Google scenic byways, they Google scenic drives, and they Google road trips. And when they find the scenic byway as a road trip, they're really interested. And if you want more information, there's my email address. Pick up the phone, call, enjoy thoroughly conversations about this kind of thing. And thank you for the ability to help you learn a little bit more about byways and their value and their relevance this morning.
Thank you, Maree, and that was fun. I have a few questions for you, and I think the audience does as well, but we'll save those to the end. Stephanie, we'll get you teed up, and I will bring up your slide deck, and I will share my screen. And we're off. So Stephanie, thank you for joining us again in the northeastern part of Washington State. I told you I'll be in your neck of the woods later this summer, midsummer. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about your byway, how it's structured? And then I have a few other questions for you, but why don't you introduce yourself and your byway?
Sure. I am the executive director for the International Selkirk Loop. It's a scenic byway in northern Idaho, eastern Washington, and southeastern British Columbia. And it was just kind of the brainchild of a few tourism type businesses that had breakfast together, trying to come up with ideas of how to attract visitors to the area to help their business. And their timing was actually perfect. They designated some state scenic byways, and that's when the National Scenic Byway was originally being started and had some programs for funding, and it all came together. The red in the center is our main scenic byway. It's 280 miles. And then you'll see some colored loops off to the side. They added 6 super side trips a few years later to try to get travelers to stay in the area a little longer. And it takes them off of the main loop where they can experience something, and then puts them right back on that loop so that we don't lose them as they navigate our scenic route.
Excellent. And are you a membership-based organization? I assume you get membership dues. You probably go after some grant funding. You have some advertising dollars as well.
Yep, we are completely self-sufficient through membership and advertising primarily. We do apply for some grants. That is typically for a specific type of project, whether it's marketing, whether it's for an interpretive sign or road signs. Those grants do not provide any funding for staff or wages, but we are completely self-sufficient in the membership and the advertising side.
Excellent. Now, let's talk more about your organization or organizational planning and your CMP and working across 2 states and 1 province. How does the CMP updating or planning process, how do you manage that? And have you updated your CMP recently?
No, we have not. It's quite old and quite thick, as Maree indicated. When they first started out, it was very much trying to develop historical locations, you know, a pull out where you could put up an interpretive sign and gathering all of these projects. As you move into marketing, you can do one or the other as an executive director. You can either be the DMO marketing and trying to attract travelers, or you can manage projects with engineering firms and such. And so as I transitioned into this position 12 years ago, I completed the projects that we had on the books at that time, and we have transitioned over to more of a DMO structure. And so we're producing travel guides and maps, collateral material to support the travelers while they're here. I run ad campaigns, social media campaigns. And so that's where our focus primarily is now, and less on these larger projects.
I see. Okay, well then let's talk more about your partnerships across the 2 states, or Washington and Idaho and British Columbia. I think you have a slide for that. And when you're talking about projects and tourism boards, you told me that there is collaboration, but there's also a level of independence. And for instance, your Canadian colleagues have a separate structure for funding for grants. Can you tell us a little bit more about that as well?
Well, we are actually 2 separate nonprofits, one in BC and another in the States, and they work cooperatively to promote the route as a whole. But yes, BC has their own funding structure with their own bed tax, just like Washington has their own and Idaho has theirs. So we all try to cooperatively use those dollars to promote the organization mission as a whole. So the dollars might be coming from one of these entities, but it's always pooled and the route is promoted as a unit, not as just the Washington section or the BC section. It's always presented as one unit, and also includes those super side trips. So that's really important to making sure that everyone feels represented every time in all manners.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah.
And why don't you tell us more about your partnerships and how you've used those to kind of overcome any challenges, or to work specifically on projects, either in Canada or in Washington or Idaho?
So one of our biggest issues at the moment is the international border, which was closed during COVID. Hours were reduced, and we are still fighting to try to get those hours restored back to what they were previously. We rely heavily on our elected officials, cities, counties, state, federal, all the way to Washington, D.C. Our economic development offices have helped us come up with the stories as to why these reduced hours are affecting the communities, not just for tourism, but for other industries as well. So we're really happy that we've been able to get at least a 90-day extension. We're hoping that they'll continue that on. Idaho, Montana, and North Dakota have partnered together on getting those hours restored. But it's really helpful to have those stories coming from, you know, a First Nation that's right on the border that it's affecting, whether it's their casino or whether it's affecting them not being able to reach their relatives on the border, to causing confusion when you want to cross. So that is a big project that we've been currently working on. But we use events that might be a member, it might be an event that we support administratively that will provide funding back to us. We have a wide variety of different ways of partnering with all of these on the list.
Excellent. Service organizations, can you tell us a little bit more about those groups and any volunteer projects along the route? I'm thinking of trash cleanup or things of that nature.
So service organizations, I'm going to pull out Rotary as the service organization that we work with. The Loop provides support for a bike ride that's a week-long bicyclist ride, where Rotary is providing the support for these cyclists as they're moving along. One group is taking their luggage from hotel to hotel. Others are following the group, helping them with mechanical issues, changing tires. If they're just too tired, they'll pick them up and take them on. And we provide the administrative support, the registration, the maintain the website, gathering everyone together, the communication, and then we split the profits of that ride at the end. So it helps with my funding, but then it helps that service organization with their mission as well. And they're providing water in certain communities in different countries. They're helping with college scholarships and whatever their mission is. So Rotary is a fantastic service organization that we partner with.
And Stephanie, you've been doing this for a number of years now, I think 12?
12 years, yes.
12 years, okay. So you've had some ups and downs, including working through a global pandemic. In terms of partnerships or projects, were there any of those things that fell short? Could you kind of look back on your experience and share lessons learned or insight? If you could fix a mistake and do something over again, what would that be? So
COVID was a big lesson for us. When everything shut down, we didn't know what to do. You know, how do you market something when you're supposed to stay home? And how do we keep ourselves going when this is over? So we surveyed our membership, asking them what they wanted us to do. And with guidance from the board of directors as to what those results of that survey showed, we had everything from Idaho wide open to British Columbia that went through multiple stay-at-home orders and shutdowns. So for the first time in our history, we split, and those two nonprofits worked independently from each other rather than for the same goal. We started with, you know, this side is open, come and visit. And then we quickly were overwhelmed with visitors and had to shift to recreate responsibly and trying to find another voice. Instead of saying, come visit, we needed to say, you know, let's do it responsibly. And the BC side, we just kept putting out pictures of outdoor recreation where someone could see it and see themselves doing it and still feel safe, and tell them to plan for a trip in the future instead of saying, come visit now. So a lot of lessons learned in that along the way. A lot of less print or no print at all. And it was all digital and social media, so we could change our message really quickly as the rules changed as we went.
Good point. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
I'll move to your next slide, Stephanie. Engagement along your scenic loop, which again, 2 states,
Yeah.
1 province. How do you manage all of this? How do you engage with them?
Well, sometimes it is a juggling act for sure. We do have an annual meeting each year that is intentionally moved from one side of the border to the other and from one state to another. So it's constantly rotating so that we're in a location different from previous years to help share all of that. Board of Directors is divided. Again, there are some from BC, some from Washington, some from Idaho, and then they're split within the communities. So I don't have them all coming from my biggest BC community. They're split throughout, also trying to include the Superside trips so that they feel represented as well. MailChimp we use for both communicating with those membership and for newsletters to travelers, putting that out there to sign up. Again, surveys on both sides. What do the travelers want to do while they're here? And the reason for that is so that we can provide support for that interest. So we have hiking maps, we have cycling books that provide elevation maps, we have wildlife and birding opportunities. And so we have different collateral that goes with those items. Again, they are very specific that they're finding locations and hikes and all around the loop. So they're not heavy in one area and weak in others. A tremendous amount of face-to-face. I am the one who personally delivers all of the travel guides and maps to all the different locations around the loop. And so I'm constantly stopping in communities trying to catch the people that I need to see so that we can make sure that we're constantly having a conversation. And then I also give a lot of presentations like this. And it might be to economic development. It might be to a city council that we need to improve a community or an entry sign or something, and try to get that all put together. So it's a lot of engagement of different types along the way.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I think this might be your last slide.
It is.
It is. All right, excellent. We'll move on to Roni. Thanks, Stephanie. I'll come back to you a little later if we have time for questions. And now I'll turn it over to Roni. Hopefully we can do some comparison and contrast. But Roni, let me tee up your slides. View, full screen. Okay, Roni, thanks again for joining us. Same question to you that I gave to Stephanie. Tell us a little bit more about your Scenic Byway, its structure, its funding, and I'll probably kind of quicken us along, Roni. We are running a bit behind schedule. I want to make sure that we have time for questions at the end, but go ahead.
Okay, sure. I'll skip over the intro about myself and how long I've been dealing with doing stuff for the Cascade Loop. I've been the executive director now for 15 months, but I've actually worked with the Loop for a long, long time. The Cascade Loop is a scenic highway that's been promoted as a tourist destination since 1978, when businessmen in Wenatchee met to discuss ways to encourage visitors to travel from the Seattle metro area, which we like to call Pugetropolis, to the other parts of the state to see the amazing scenery and iconic geology. At that time, the predominant focus was the production of the travel guide, the printed travel guide, because that was, of course, before there was such things as websites and social media. Travel guide would entice travelers to visit, help them plan their trip, and then guide them along the byway during their actual vacation. Requesting the free travel guide is still the #1 call to action in all of the efforts that we do.
Interesting. Okay.
Over the 45 years since its birth, the promotion efforts have advanced with technologies, and our website and social media platforms, email marketing, print ad placements, and banner advertising have broadened our reach and introduced our National Scenic Byway and Washington State to an ever-increasing audience around the world. I don't know if you noticed on the map, the tagline is Washington State's ultimate road trip. It is, as you mentioned, 440 miles. It leads visitors. I've just got this little thing I'll run through real fast. It leads visitors from the salt waters of the Puget Sound over the Cascade Mountains, through foothills and valleys, then back again, past snow-capped peaks and island vistas to complete the loop just north of Seattle. It's divided into 9 distinct geographic regions, and it passes through 6 counties. Within each region, we have identified additional side trips that lead travelers into even more diverse vistas with unique characteristics and quaint communities. And we actually have 3 independent byways that are part of the Cascade Loop footprint. We have the Would-Be Scenic Aisleway, we have the Stevens Pass Greenway, and we have North Cascades Highway, North Cascades Scenic Highway. There you go. This rough timeline, just I built this slide to put it into perspective how long the organization has been viable and kind of to see how the efforts have changed with the technologies. From 1982-ish to 2004, the Cascade Loop was solely a printed travel guide. And it's digest size. If anyone hasn't seen it, it's the size of a piece of paper folded in half, which makes it really convenient to keep in the car. Mm-hmm. You can go ahead and move to the next slide. If anybody, like Matthew said, he's going to provide these decks if anybody wants to look at stuff more closely, but we'll buzz through this. Our board is represented by, or we have at least one member that represents each of the 9 regions. And it's a mix of lodging, retail businesses. We have a city administrator, chamber directors, an economic development director, and a marketing consultant. To make sure that we've got a good mix of perspectives for the different efforts that we do. Our members themselves, they're all tourism related in one way or another at any rate, and about 30% lodging, 28% are VICs or DMOs, and 18% is activity, again, all tourism related activity. I threw miscellaneous in there just to get the numbers to work, but the activities are adventures like zip lines and horseback riding, or leisure activities like museums and tours. And the miscellaneous is crap, now I can't remember. I'm trying to hurry.
No worries, Roni. No, I think this is a good visual. I think this is
Okay.
good for other folks out there to understand that it's not all just hotel partners,
right,
that want heads and beds and are dependent on that business, and then lodging tax to DMO. So this is good. I like this, and that might be a model. I wonder how many other scenic byways the proportions are similar to yours. That might. It would be
really interesting. In fact, as I'm looking at it, it makes me wish that we were less strong on lodging and stronger on activity, and that's something that I'll keep thinking about how to shift that a little bit as time goes on. But all right, go ahead next slide. Oh, you went back.
Oops, wrong way. This one, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So funding, I just kind of broke down our annual budget to show that 27% of our budget goes to the production and distribution of the travel guide. And then the breakdowns of paid so paid advertising and marketing is about 10% of the budget. Other promotion is almost 6%. Grant fulfillment costs is about 10%.
Okay.
And I'm going to throw in a piece of advice. Be careful what you wish for when you apply for grants. Some of the grant opportunities might mean that a lot more work than you thought you might have to do. Voice of experience. As far as the income side of things, as it shows, 46.8% comes from our memberships, as well as the digital buys, which is sponsored newsletters or sponsored digital newsletters and other web-based opportunities. And then a little bit more than half right now is coming from the county LTACs. As I said, we go through 6 counties, and 5 of them have been partnering with us. And typically what I do is request whatever. So for using a Chelan County as an example, 3 of our regions are within Chelan County. 2 of our regions are within Snohomish County. So I make requests based on how much of the travel guide that county represents, and then request hotel motel grant funding to help offset those costs. That's what the bulk of that is. Our corridor management plan, we spent many years building this monster and filed it in 2012, and then the program, of course, dried up. But then we finally did get our national designation award in 2021. At this point in time, the corridor management plan needs to go on a diet. I need to cut from 220 pages down to, the 15 or whatever they recommend. The one thing that I've discovered, the main thing I've discovered anyway, since between COVID and the transition between our executive director position, there's been a lot of turnover in a lot of the stakeholders' business, either businesses sold or visitor information center staffing changed. So a lot of the projects that were in our original corridor management plan, which, as you can see, was over 10 years ago.
Yes.
Either projects have already been completed, or whoever championed them and wanted them added to the list is no longer involved or alive in some cases. So now begins the partnership phase of and the stakeholder engagement phase of getting back out there again and going meeting with the various entities and figuring out one main priority per region and one secondary priority per region, instead of pages and pages of projects.
And Roni, that doesn't all rest on you, right? You have board members to help with that?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Mostly it's me. Yeah.
Sure.
But I've got a great board that is always, you have to have a good board. You have to have a good mix of where they come from, what they do, and then their circle of influence is huge, because they're able to bring in more people than I would ever know to contact to start working on these projects. So
yeah, exactly. And I think that's a good segue to your last slide, working on a specific project as it relates to destination development, rural tourism in the north central region of Washington. So tell us a little bit more about this project. Well, maybe I should also share that this project is in partnership with the state of Washington Tourism through SWT's Rural Tourism Support Program that looks at a region and helps develop tourism resources in a region in Washington state. So the last RTS program or participant was the North Central region. And after months of planning and community workshops and strategizing, the region now has a few priority projects or grant projects tied to grant funding from State of Washington Tourism. And Roni is working on one in particular, a food and farm trail map. So Roni, tell us about the partnerships and the engagement in relation to this destination development project.
Sure. Yeah, it started through the program, the State of Washington Tourism Program, and we met and invite all the stakeholders that were invited to participate from the 3 regions or 4 regions. It's Okanagan County, Chelan County, Douglas County, and the Colville Confederated Tribes. So stakeholders were asked to participate. I was one of them. Happy to be able to be involved in this. We had some in-person strategy sessions where we discussed with the people from these regions what was important and what are we missing, looking for gaps. And one of the things that came out of all of this was with the farm, food to farm being a big buzzword really, but it's a huge part of the economy these days, and especially within these particular counties and areas, because it's farmland. I mean, Okanagan County is a whole lot of farmland. Douglas County and Chelan County all have a whole lot of farmland. There had been an organization over the years, mostly in Chelan County, I think, or it started in Chelan County. It started in Leavenworth, I believe. And it morphed into a couple of different things, and it ended up as kind of more of a winery visitation project.
Mhm.
And then it went away just about COVID time. I don't think COVID was the reason, but at any rate, that was the timing. But we actually have access to all of the information, the files, the map, which I'm showing you just a chunk of the map. And so we're going to we're in the process of finding what makes sense as far as participation levels for providers. We've had people sitting in on our meetings that are she raises lambs and she provides the lambs for consumers, but she doesn't want people coming to her farm.
Okay.
So finding the right balance between, if you want to eat the freshest food you can possibly eat, you can find it at these restaurants or this grocery store in this little town or whatever, and working out the partnerships between how that's all going to come together. But it's exciting because it's really fun to meet all these people and to see what's important to them and how a lot of our thinking is aligned, and
Sure.
And it's going to be a good project when we finally get it going.
Well, get it going and embed it within your CMP maybe as a short-term or long-term project over time.
Yeah, good
Keep
point.
that in mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Roni. And thank you, panelists. We're running a little late, but now is a great opportunity to open up the discussion to audience. So folks on the line, if you're still there, this is your time to ask Roni, Stephanie, Dr. Forbes, any questions that you may have. Mike?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. The first one I think is probably, well, anybody can answer, but Dr. Forbes, this might be for you. Where might I find help in creating a scenic byway?
Well, we created the only scenic byway that's been designated in Pennsylvania in the last 20 years from scratch, and are starting to work on one in northern Indiana.
So I think you would be a great resource then for that.
Yeah, and there's a structured process that can be followed.
Another resource we have here in Washington State is Annette Pitts down in Experience Olympia. She obviously was the executive director of Cascade Loop for many years, and then she is starting their own byway right now. So that, she's a great resource trying to go through all of the state, processes here in Washington. And I'm sorry I'm having to run through this because we're right on time here. One more question, and this is for all of you. For unknown rural areas, how can we increase awareness along scenic byways?
Ooh, good question.
I can take that. If your unknown rural community is, along or close to a scenic byway, then you partner with them. That's that's a no-brainer.
Well, there's a barrier. There might be a barrier. Partnership. Is that also membership, or can I partner with you without having to be an official member, Roni?
Gotcha. In our case, it's you have to be a member for us to include you in the printed travel guide and on the website, unless it is an activity and a location on a park. Like if you have a great park, you don't have to be a member. A park can be a location. We have the website has members, and it also has a whole list of locations, which is just a park or a place to go or a hike, a trail. And those things can be on our website without having to be a membership situation.
Well, or it could be a special project, kind of like the destination development project that we just talked about, where it's a larger collaboration of different entities that may be members with you or not, for community benefit.
True.
Maree or Stephanie, would you like to tackle that question as well?
There are all kinds of grant funds, not from the Federal Highway Administration, available to help byways in rural communities. And there are all kinds of sources.
And I also, being membership based, you do have to be a member, but we do have locations that we do call out that are not members. but just have conversations, big ones, small ones. Find those little pieces that you can connect that have similar pieces in other communities, and get yourself on those tracks.
For sure. For folks that have to run to the next meeting, that's fine. I want to stay on for another minute or two or five and ask a question of the panelists. And folks on the line, feel free to stay on for just a few more minutes too, if you'd like. But I think a good parting question and good for all of us to think about, including the folks on the call, is what does the future look like for Scenic Byways? You know, a global pandemic closes borders and it shuts down the tourism economy. How do we plan for that next time? Or Dr. Forbes also said byway organizations, some of them are going into hibernation, and how do we revitalize them with a new leadership or goals or priorities? Or how do we adapt infrastructure changes? I'm thinking of electric vehicles and EV charging stations in terms of byway projects and tourism infrastructure. So with all of that said, ladies, what does the future look like in your neck of the woods or nationally or internationally? Stephanie, I'm thinking of you because there's a lot more charging stations in Canada than in the US right now. But yeah, what do Scenic Byways look like 50 years from now?
I personally think that scenic byways are the future of travel. Especially during the pandemic, it was something that people sought out. They could go, they could stay in their car and still feel safe. They could go on a trail and still feel safe. So I think there's a big push for scenic drives and scenic byways. You do have to accommodate those travelers with, yes, those EV stations, and you know, we've included those spots on our maps. And how do you incorporate those things? Where are the holes? But for us, we think scenic byway is very much in the future.
Roni, Maree?
Boy, I'll defer to you, Maree. I'm not sure I can wrap my brain around tomorrow, let alone.
Well,
Things change so fast. You have to be really, really flexible. So that's a great question.
byways have to recognize the value they deliver. And once they do that, and once they're cognizant of, we can deliver this value, this value, this value, this value, then forming the partnerships and getting the stakeholders together in each one of those various things that deliver value, whether it's to visitors or to the business locations or to the community, etc., and planning their programs around those, because when you deliver value, people are supportive. And I think with those big CMPs, that's one of the things that didn't happen, is byways didn't ever hone down their key value elements and say, all right, what's the program? And then agile strategic planning, where you work backwards and you say, okay, we're 3 years out from now. What do we have to do this month, this quarter, and this year in order to get to the goal 3 years from now, so that you're always actively planning to be moving forward?
I agree. Jared, I saw a question come in from you that, yes, this will be recorded and shared with registrants. I'm looking for, yep, you're welcome. Any other questions, folks? I know we're a little over time, but we can take one or two more. I can even unmute someone if your question is a little longer or more complicated. I thought I saw. Oh, go ahead.
Matthew, I just want one of the things that I had in my notes that I just wanted to share as a product of thinking about being a byway leader is, without my members, there is no Cascade Loop, and without our visitors, there is no Cascade Loop.
Sure,
so it's imperative that you find the right balance there.
Well put. Well put. Well, I'll also mention in the planning process and what the future looks like in terms of funding, there'll be funding opportunities or grant opportunities, I should say, from State of Washington Tourism later this summer or into early fall. There's also a large federal grant opportunity that will become available later this year too, perhaps early fall. Maree, is that what you think as well? Okay.
Yeah.
But like Dr. Forbes said, you shouldn't depend on grants alone.
No, and supposedly this time they're going to make the decisions much more quickly than they did with the last round.
They can't possibly take longer.
Agreed.
Well, and I'd also encourage folks to look at grant funding for EV charging stations at the state and federal level. Again, partnering with other organizations on EV charging stations. That has just happened with the White Pass Scenic Byway. A project was proposed for the Olympic highway around the Olympic Peninsula here in Washington State. State of Washington Tourism provided a letter of support for that project, in addition to the local DMO. I think I might have saw Marcia Massey on the line. But yes, I think those are the future, or those things aren't going to go away. I think there's going to be more and more of them, and byways need to be ready to join in, to help plan, to help fund, what have you. So, okay, folks, I think we're out of time. I don't see any other questions from the audience. So I'll say thank you, panelists, and thank you, everyone that joined the call today. The recording and documents that Dr. Forbes mentioned will be sent to you later this week.